The rain had started just before they left the motel, a steady drizzle that turned the roads to glass and made every curve a quiet negotiation. Wayne Hudson gripped the steering wheel with both hands, his knuckles pale against the leather. Loretta sat beside him, watching the fog roll over the evergreens like breath on cold glass. The wipers moved in rhythm, but they couldn't keep up with the mist that gathered at the edges of the windshield. They were hours off course. The GPS had failed miles back, showing only a spinning circle where their route should have been. Wayne had tried pulling over to reset it, but no signal came. Now they were deep in unfamiliar country, just trees, winding road, and the occasional battered mile marker half swallowed by ivy. Neither of them said much. Their son, Chris, had taught them how to read paper maps years ago, back when he first started flying rescue missions. But they hadn't brought one. They didn't expect to need it. Wayne wasn't used to getting lost. He had made a career out of knowing where things belonged, packages, letters, people on his route. Retirement had taken that structure away, leaving only soft days and too much memory. Loretta missed the library, missed the echo of children's laughter, the smell of old books, and the way Chris used to call every Sunday before his shift. The silence since his death had never quite stopped ringing. The accident wasn't loud. It was the kind of moment that could be mistaken for something else, a branch hitting the car, maybe a pothole. But the tremor in the wheel told Wayne otherwise. He had been making a cautious left turn when the motorcycle appeared, almost ghost-like through the fog, barely visible until it was nearly beside them. The sedan's front bumper clipped the rear wheel of the bike. The rider wobbled, skidded, but somehow stayed up. Wayne pulled over immediately. Loretta reached for her seatbelt latch, heart pounding, her hand trembling as she opened the glove compartment for the insurance papers. Through the distorted rearview mirror, Wayne could see the motorcyclist's tail light blinking red like a warning. He looked around, hoping it had been a solitary traveler. But then the sound came, low at first, then growing. More engines. Several. Within moments, they were surrounded. 6 motorcycles, maybe more. Their lights cut through the fog like searchlights. Black jackets, chrome accents, and the sound of idling engines filled the narrow road. The Hudson's car, silver and aging, looked like a lost raft in a rising tide. A few of the riders dismounted, boots crunching wet gravel. Helmets stayed on. No one spoke. They didn't need to. The man who approached the driver's side window stood taller than the rest. He moved like someone used to command. His leather jacket was worn, patched with names and symbols Wayne didn't understand. His gloved hand tapped once on the window, slow and heavy. Wayne lowered it with effort, his fingers stiff. The rider didn't yell. His face was unreadable behind his tinted visor, but his body spoke of confrontation. Of consequences. Wayne's breath caught in his throat. Loretta whispered something, maybe a prayer, maybe just his name. Then the man's gaze shifted. Pinned to the dashboard was a photograph, long sun-faded at the edges but still bright in the center. It was held there by a small metal clip, a habit Wayne had kept ever since the funeral. The image showed a young man in a red and black paramedic uniform, standing next to a rescue helicopter, his arm around a fellow crew member, both grinning in the wind. The insignia on his chest was clear. The smile was unmistakable. The biker stared. For a moment, time seemed to tilt. The fog, the engines, even the humming tension of the other riders, all of it faded into a suspended silence. The man slowly removed his helmet, revealing a weather-beaten face lined with years and road miles. His eyes were pale, narrowed in disbelief. The Hudsons watched as the expression changed, not softened, exactly, but unraveled. The rigid anger began to loosen, replaced by something else. Recognition. Memory. He stepped back, signaling something with a brief, sharp gesture. The others hesitated, then slowly returned to their bikes. No words were exchanged. Wayne remained frozen behind the wheel. Loretta's hand was still on the dashboard, just inches from the photo. She glanced at the biker again, trying to understand what had shifted, why the threat had dissolved into stillness. The man didn't look at them again. He stared at the photo a moment longer, then turned toward his bike. Before he mounted it, he looked up at the sky, not as if checking the weather, but as if listening for something beyond the reach of sound. Then he rode. The others followed. And just like that, the road was empty again. The silence that returned was thicker than the fog. Wayne started the car, but didn't drive. Not yet. He stared at the spot where the rider had stood. Something about that man had changed in the instant he saw Chris's face. Something had been remembered. Or forgiven. Maybe both. Loretta, too, felt the shift. She reached out and touched the photo, gently straightening it against the dashboard clip. Her fingertips lingered on her son's image, just long enough to whisper a mother's silent message to the past. The rain continued. The wipers resumed their rhythm. And the Hudsons drove on, not knowing who the man was or why their son's face had halted a storm that had been gathering around them. But something had passed between strangers that day. Something wordless. A reckoning. A reminder. Whatever it was, it had changed everything. The rain had let up by the time they vanished around the bend, but the road still shimmered under the clouded light like a memory trying to surface. Jax rode at the front, his eyes not on the road but somewhere farther off, beyond the wet trees and broken yellow lines, back through years he had tried to forget. He barely noticed the cold. The engines behind him blurred into background noise, like waves against a distant shore. What he had seen in that car had reopened something long buried. 15 years earlier, he had bled out in the Cascade Mountains. He remembered the crunch of pine needles beneath him, the G** metal sky through the treetops, and the slow fade of pain into numb acceptance. A deal gone bad, a partner gone worse, and a single bullet lodged near his lung. He remembered trying to crawl, then giving up. No one was coming. Not for him. But someone had. The chop of blades had broken through the stillness like a second chance. He had thought it was a hallucination, death dressed in red and white. But it landed. It touched down on a slope barely wide enough for the skids. And a man jumped out. No judgment. No hesitation. The medic moved like he'd done it 100 times. Slid down the ravine. Packed the wound. Lifted Jax's half-dead weight onto a stretcher. Never asked who he was or why he'd been there. Never looked at the tattoos or the blood or the pistol lying half-buried in moss. Just worked with purpose. A calm urgency. Jax had drifted in and out of consciousness. He didn't remember much of what was said, but he remembered the hands, strong, steady, warm even through gloves. And he remembered the voice. Not loud, not commanding. Just enough to keep the darkness at bay. Just enough to remind him he was still alive. Before they reached the hospital, the medic had pressed something into his hand. A small coin, round and heavy. Bronze with a rescue insignia stamped into its face. A challenge coin. A token of honor among first responders. Jax had clutched it like a lifeline. That night, he'd turned it over 100 times, as if it held the key to some better version of himself. He never learned the man's name. The recovery had been long. And Jax had disappeared into it. Left the state. Changed phones, circles, lives. But he kept the coin. It lived in his pocket, close to his skin, grounding him like ballast. He thought of the medic sometimes, imagined him somewhere in the world saving other people, never knowing that one of them had started over because of him. Then, one day, he read a headline. Paramedic K** led in helicopter crash during rescue attempt. He had stared at the photo, the grainy image of a smiling man in a flight suit. It was the same face. The same calm. The name beneath it, Christopher Hudson. He hadn't known his last name. Hadn't known he'd died. Just like that. A fire in the hills. A patient in critical condition. Rotor failure. No survivors. The article said he'd been 31. Jax had read it twice. Then a third time. Then he folded it up and carried it in his jacket for 2 years. Now, looking into that car, into the stunned eyes of the old man behind the wheel and the trembling hands of the woman next to him, he had finally seen where the face came from. Their son. Their only child. The medic who had saved him. Jax pulled off the road at the next turnout and stopped his bike. The others slowed, uncertain. He didn't speak. Just sat there, helmet dangling from one hand, the other pressed against the fuel tank as if trying to hold still a heart that had just leapt backward in time. The fog had lifted, but the world still felt thick. He didn't tell the crew what had happened. Not at first. Some things required silence before words. He just stood there, staring down the mountain, while the others waited nearby, respectful in a way they didn't fully understand. He could still feel the moment, the cold fingers of near death, the smell of rotor blades cutting air, and the voice that never asked him who he had been. That kind of mercy changes a man. For a while, Jax had tried to repay it in small ways. He stopped running G*NS. Left the circles that chewed people up. Took jobs no one else wanted. Dug fence posts in the rain. Cleaned gutters. Worked nights at a halfway house. It wasn't redemption. Just motion. A life leaning toward something instead of away. But even that had drifted into routine. The coin stayed in his pocket. The memory stayed sealed. Until today. He thought of those two in the car. Wayne and Loretta, though he didn't know their names yet. People whose lives had been turned inside out by a single phone call, the kind that ends with silence. He imagined the pride they must have felt, then the grief. He imagined them holding onto the photo not out of habit, but because it was all they had left. He wondered how long they had been driving. If they visited the crash site often. If they still set a plate for him on holidays. Jax didn't know what to do with the ache opening inside him. It wasn't guilt, exactly. It wasn't regret. It was something quieter. The slow swell of a debt that could no longer be repaid to the one who had earned it. But maybe, he thought, it wasn't too late to repay it forward. He reached into his jacket, pulled out the coin, and turned it in his palm. It had grown smooth over the years. The edges worn soft from being held too tightly for too long. He remembered what the medic had said, just one thing, whispered above the rotor wash. "You're not done yet." And somehow, that felt true again. The morning they left Silver Creek was gray and still. The roads were drying, but the clouds hadn't moved much. It wasn't the kind of morning that announced anything, just a soft hush, as if the world had paused to listen. Wayne packed the trunk slowly, more carefully than usual. Loretta folded the map they hadn't needed after all. Her hands moved with the memory of routines long practiced, travel checklists, folded jackets, the quiet counting of hours. But there was something different in the air between them. Not joy. Not even peace. Just a kind of clearing. The kind that happens after a long-held breath is finally exhaled. They had slept better than either expected. The day before had exhausted something deep inside them, something older than sorrow and quieter than pain. And though neither said it aloud, they both felt as if Chris had come closer to them in those 2 days than in all the years since his passing. Not through dreams. Not through signs. But through people, faces they had never imagined, lives reshaped by a single act of mercy that neither of them had witnessed firsthand. Wayne had stood among them the night before, surrounded by 50 men and women on motorcycles, their faces serious, their movements deliberate, as they laid white roses at the base of the memorial. There had been no speeches. No music. Just the wind through the trees and the sound of leather brushing against leather as each figure stepped forward. And at the center of it all, the photo of Chris, the one from the dashboard, propped carefully among the flowers. Jax had been the last to move. He'd removed his jacket before stepping up. Beneath it, his shirt was plain. No colors. No symbols. Just a man standing where a younger version of himself had once been lifted from the edge of death. He knelt, and from his pocket, he took the coin. Time didn't stop, but something in the moment did. It hovered. It gathered itself like a held note. And when he placed the coin beside the photo, there was no doubt what it meant. The weight of it. The years it had carried. The version of himself he had kept alive through its presence. He didn't say anything. Didn't need to. But those who watched understood. Jax had let go of a burden, not in regret, but in reverence. Wayne had said nothing, but later, in the privacy of their room, he had unfolded a small note he'd carried since the funeral. It was a message written in Chris's handwriting, the last card he had sent home. It had been tucked into a drawer for over a decade, unread by anyone else. The ink had faded, but one line remained legible, even now. Doing good doesn't need witnesses. The words lingered. As they drove out of town, the Hudsons passed the Echo Center one last time. Its modest sign swayed gently in the breeze. No one stood outside this time, but Loretta noticed a mural on the far wall. Painted in bold colors, it showed a pair of hands lifting another from a ledge. Simple, but unmistakable. The message was clear without needing to be read. Inside, they knew, were people who had once been cast out. Men and women who had slipped through the cracks, written off as lost or broken. But not anymore. Not since one man had decided to build something with the second chance he'd been given. They didn't stop. Some closures aren't marked by fanfare, but by quiet understanding. In the passenger seat, Loretta looked out at the mountains. Her thoughts wandered to the years they'd spent grieving in silence, holding onto memories like glass, sharp-edged and fragile. But now, something in her had softened. Not healed, not exactly. But stitched. Like the first thread pulled through after a long tear. Wayne drove in silence, but his mind wasn't still. For most of his life, he'd sat in judgment. On the bench, in the robes, with the gavel and the rules and the clear sense of right and wrong. He had weighed the lives of strangers without knowing their stories. Had believed in order. In law. But never in mercy. Until now. Now, he had seen what redemption looked like when it didn't come in a courtroom or a verdict, but in a gesture. A coin. A building where broken men learned to build things again. He had judged 100 like Jax. And not once had he imagined what might lie beneath the surface. As the highway stretched ahead of them, the sun broke through the clouds at last. A thin strip of gold lit the road in front of them, casting long shadows behind. Wayne didn't speak, but his hand reached across the console and closed over Loretta's. She didn't flinch. She just squeezed it back, eyes still on the road ahead. In the rearview mirror, the mountains slowly shrank behind them. But nothing felt like it was left behind. Everything that mattered had come with them. In the photo now tucked safely into Loretta's coat pocket, Chris smiled the same way he always had, like someone who knew the value of every breath. And somewhere on another road, a man rode with no coin in his pocket, but lighter all the same. Kindness, Wayne realized, doesn't disappear when the giver is gone. Sometimes, it grows into places they never lived to see. Sometimes, it saves people they never knew. And sometimes, it builds a world in their name, quietly and without question. Because kindness without question is enough.